And last night we were able to do a taste test. So people could compare our regular honey, which is probably more clover, to our prairie strips honey, which has a lot more different types of floral nectar resources in it. And it was really fun. We even brought like a comb in that people could scrape directly off the comb to try it, and it was overall a pretty big success. So that was fun. And people liked the more herby prairie honey than they did the regular more clover honey, which I was surprised by. Well, so Judy suggested that since it's crucial this time of year, that maybe we discuss fall feeding a little bit. Um, I have a handful of slides about that I'd be happy to step up and start sharing right now, just to go over. So this time of year, well, really, this is something you need to be thinking about at the beginning of September. You hopefully you've got your honey pulled, you've got your mite treatments on, and you need to get a good idea of what shape all your colonies are in, and to know what your fall feeding situation is going to look like. So I'll go ahead and share some of these slides.
And Randall, what kind of fall forage do you have kind of in your area, or when do you start to see feeding as kind of a need in your area?
Late summer. I mean, in the research that we've done, our colonies reach their peak mass. So it's really helpful if you have a scale, and you can buy a scale that's permanent under the colony. Those things are called like broodminder, or what was the other one, Judy?
We use broodminder and hive scales.
Hive scales.
Or healthy hives.
Oh, okay. We just slide a scale. We've got like a lab scale that we slide under our colonies, and that's how we get our weight, and we record that weight. Or we have what's called a tilt scale, which I can show you a photo of, that will give you half of the weight of the hive. But so it's nice to monitor the weight because hives that are too deep should weigh 100 to 120 pounds going into winter. That's sort of a rule of thumb. I try to keep all my hives that are too deep above 100 pounds going into winter. Ideally, that hive in the second deep will have 10 full frames of honey. That would be the ideal situation. If there's not enough in there and you want to do a feeding, you have a couple choices. You can purchase corn syrup. I know that it seems like every beekeeper group has like their own source for corn syrup. I buy mine from a local commercial beekeeper who has a lot of colonies and will sell me corn syrup by the 5-gallon bucket. Or you can mix your own with a 2-to-1 sugar syrup. So 2 pounds sugar for 1 pound water. And Judy says that UNL actually has some how-to videos for mixing your sugar syrup. And then in terms of feeding, I grabbed some photos of a few different methods. There's a lot of things that you can buy to insert into your colony. The top left there, it's just a tub that you can pretty much fill with the sugar syrup, and the bees will come up. You set it on the top of the top bars, and the bees will come up and take it. I've seen similar ones done with someone who, one of our local beekeepers, goes out and buys some short trays, and then what he does is he buys like plastic cross stitch mesh, and he'll fill the tray with the corn syrup, and then he will just set that mesh on top, and that way the bees can walk out and collect the sugar syrup without actually falling in and drowning. On the bottom left-hand side, you can see insert feeders, which are about the width of 2 frames. So you would have to remove 2 frames for those. But they're big and black, and I think that they're about a gallon a piece. So you can fill those up. And it's got a little wood cover that goes across the top, and then 2 little funnels that are mesh funnels inside where the bees can crawl down and collect that sugar syrup. They're at the bottom. Some people, when I worked in California, we just had a bunch of jars or cans. We used mason jars that we had poked holes in the lid of, and then we had holes in the cover. It was a migratory cover that they had cut holes into, and so we were able to just bloop, put a can or a mason jar with the holes, perforated holes in it, and just set that on top, and that was a way for it to it wouldn't drip out very fast, and they could run up and collect it. Our method here at Iowa State is they're the one at the top. We will fill a bag with sugar syrup and then poke holes in it. So we have this little board that's got a bunch of nails driven through it. We call it Mr. Pokey. And we just boom, 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 poke some holes in that. The bees can come up on top of the top bars and collect the nectar or the sugar syrup as they please. And then the photo on the right is an image of a tilt scale. So what it is a little digital scale that's got a hook at the bottom, and we can slide it under the side of the hive and lift half the hive up, and that'll give us half the hive's weight. So we either do it once on each side. We usually do it once on each side, and then add that weight together to get our hive mass. But it's a pretty nifty tool, especially if you can't afford a brood minder for all your colonies, or you're going out and maintaining your colonies by yourself, so you can't exactly lift them up and set them on a scale. The tilt scale is a pretty nice option. It's similar to the stuff that they use to weigh produce. Like, it'll have a big hanging scale for weighing produce, and that's what we use. Those are our methods. Judy, did you have
produce and I think for like fish, like if you like game, if you're a hunter, right? We have a similar thing where it's a weight scale where you can, especially if you strap your hive up, then you can use it it's like a pulley weight, and then we have 2 students lift it with a bar.
That's great. And those are just a handful of the methods folks use for feeding. Now, UNL has a really nice outfit because they've got so many colonies. I don't know, Judy, were you able to find some photos of the way that you all do feeding?
I'm still digging around. I think we've showed photos of the giant pump system that we used. Previously, we used to just use buckets, and these were just 5-gallon feeder buckets. We would mix syrup, 2-to-1 syrup into, and then use feeders in our colonies. We use top bar feeders. We kind of moved away from the division feeders just because you often have to get down to the bottom box to use them, or it's a little bit harder. With these top box feeders, you can just pop the lids open and just, put a lot more feed into it and not have to go back as frequently. We moved to corn syrup this year. We have used corn syrup in the past, and it kind of just depends on like you said, access. A lot of us smaller beekeepers don't have the ability to get large orders of corn syrup or barrels of corn syrup. It really doesn't make sense for someone to deliver a small load to, a small beekeeper. But if you can kind of collaborate with beekeepers in the region, oftentimes commercial beekeepers will go on, kind of collaboratively purchase a large order of corn syrup in an area and then meet up at the same day and just kind of, retrieve or get the corn syrup pumped into barrels. So Luke, how many barrels did we order this, or did we get this year?
Yeah, we ordered 10 barrels worth. So these are 55-gallon barrels. And then a local beekeeper, he asked if we'd be interested in going in on the corn syrup, and we did. So he filled the rest. Well, he ordered a tanker, and then he had us purchase the barrels from him, and then he had barrels that he filled himself. And so we were there filling the barrels from the tanker. And he told me in the past that usually more local beekeepers would go in on it with him. And so that would be a good way for local beekeepers to be able to collaboratively order corn syrup. And he ordered it from one of the beekeeping supply companies. I think both Man Lake and Dedand offer the corn syrup that way.
Yeah, and I think for our standpoint, we have started to grow in terms of our operation and our need. And so previously, when you're running, I think the first couple of years we were running probably around 40 to 60 hives, and the mixing sugar syrup was pretty manageable with student help. We did put apple cider vinegar in the syrup to help it from fermenting a bit. And given the time it takes to mix the syrup, the amount of cleanup, the amount of moving and lifting of the buckets, this system seems to work better for us and the growth of our operation. So right now we probably run about 105, 110 colonies. Is that about right?
But we did lose just a few recently, Judy, from the one project, but well, I'd say about 100.
Yeah, so anywhere from I think 80 to 100 colonies, depending on which research projects and educational programs we have per year. But it does tend to, you have to think about how much labor you're putting into mixing, how much labor it takes, the equipment, the storage, and factor all those things in. So the corn syrup, if we don't use it completely up this fall, we also are saving time in the spring with the feeding. And I think the corn syrup lasts much longer. It's about 2 to 3 years, I think.
Yeah, that's what he said, yeah.
I do have some photos. Did we have any other questions in the chat? I'm sorry, I'm still scanning through spring photos to see if I can bring up those feeder buckets. But we've used a number of systems in Minnesota. We use these pint buckets that were basically gravity feeders. So the inner hive cover would be put on top of the hive, and then there would be another deep box put on top just as a feeder chamber. And then there would be 2 gravity feeder buckets inside. So there would be like pint size or quart size buckets. The holes would be punched on the top of the lids. And once you turn that over, some of that liquid will fall pretty quickly at first, but then it slows down. And that's what we call the gravity feeders. Bees can come up there and lick it, and it will just slowly kind of percolate through that. It won't drip completely because you want to make sure you fill it, and then you empty it upside down, make sure that the main flow and the vacuum, air vacuum suction prevents the rest of the liquids from flushing out really quickly. And then once that flow slows to a trickle or to just, the droplets, and you put it on the colony, and they can slowly feed from that. It's the same concept as Randall's bags, except for the bees come to the top and feed, right? Or do they climb on top of the bag, or are the holes on the bottom?
Yeah, the holes are on the top of the bag, so they climb on top, yeah.
But then I think the pressure of the bag and the water is what pushes the sugar up.
Yeah, but it doesn't just go, it doesn't flood out. It's slowly kind of, at each perforation we make, it pools just a little bit at the perforation, and they can come and get it. Unless we get kind of out of hand with our Mr. Pokey tool and we poke holes all the way through the bag, or poke too many, right?
Do you ever have problems with bees biting like too large of hole? Because, like sometimes you put those Avogard treatments, like those cardboards, they will chew those things almost to bits. I'm just wondering, do they ever try to rip open the bag?
Not that I've seen.
Do they try to propolis it down?
Yes, they do propolize it.
Speaking of, let me share some photos. How have your bees been, Randall?
Good. They're good. They we have mite treatments on, and they're still a pretty decent size. We took a mass at our research sites a week and a half ago, and they were all well over 100 pounds still. So that's good.
Yeah, Yeah, and we're probably a month into what I would say is kind of like the robbing season. And so we're starting to see colonies that might have been, you know, heavy about a month or 3 weeks ago, starting to kind of get depleted from stores. And we're already starting to see some declines in colonies at this time as well. This picture is actually interestingly from the queen that we showed last time, that fainting queen. Just about after we met, you know, a week after she was having her fainting session. This is a video I showed last time where the queen just appeared to be very immobile for several minutes, almost dead. I almost sampled her. She was very close to going in my jar. And then 13 minutes later, she just gets up and walks away. This colony just started to spill out with the cute, you know, bees dying. It is actually quite a large colony. You can see it's 2 deeps and 3 supers. So it died for probably, I don't know, what'd you say, Luke? We collected a gallon bag of bees 3-4 weeks in a row. And there's still quite a lot of bees inside. It's still queen ripe. But this is the interesting thing, is that it's like an acute classic kill, and yet it's still taken a while for it to die.
Yeah, Judy, I think it was between like maybe a half a gallon and a gallon baggie, but yeah, definitely a large portion of dead bees. We were able to do the hive inspections at this location, and that hive is, I did see eggs. I didn't see the queen, but I did see eggs, so they are queen ripe.
And that was an interesting thing too, is we noticed that even like in this really polluted landscape, or this weird landscape where bees are struggling, sometimes the queens are buffered from a little bit of it. You still see them being queen right, or you're still seeing them produce eggs, almost like they're trying to ramp up more brood rearing because they know that there's a lot of mortality they have to make up for. But that was just an interesting observation. We don't know if it's connected or not, but certainly this is showing some classic sign of some environmental stressor. This is another thing you should be noticing a lot of, especially if you're doing inspections. I'd strongly encourage you to do very quick checks. Do not spend a lot of time messing around with your hives right now, because you could potentially basically flag them to become vulnerable to attack. And this, unfortunately, is one of the things that we have to struggle with the research program, is because we have to take the data, we have to take these inspections and be very thorough, but at the same time, we have to be very careful that these weaker colonies, once we leave and open them up, aren't completely taken over by robbers. And that's what's happening here with this very small colony. You can see signs of robbers, especially when there's a lot of bees flying around and they all seem to be going in one direction with, you know, one hive mind. These bees obviously don't belong to this colony because they're trying to go in under the lid. They're going into openings of the hive that isn't the typical entrance. And that's a really easy way to tell if the colony is being attacked by robbers. You're seeing robbing now too, aren't you?
Who, me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, because I did a practice that I don't recommend.
Oh, the open feeding. Not open feeding, the cleaning out.
We had all of our wet honey super frames, and all of our, normally I would place an inner cover on top of our colonies and put a whole bunch of wet frames on there for the bees to crawl up and clean out and then store that honey back. But all of our inner covers were taken by a research project, so I don't have any right now. So I decided to just, stack them all out in a field a good distance away from my colonies and let them have at it, thinking if it was far enough away, maybe it wouldn't, maybe they wouldn't start robbing. But of course they did. So I ended up putting entrance reducers on all my colonies in the area. And that helped. I did a brief inspection today, and their populations were all still pretty good. I just was I came to a crossroads where at the site where we keep our bees and process our honey, it needed to be dealt with, and it was But maybe I can find the video from that. It's pretty cool. I'll look that up while you keep talking about this, because
yeah, robbing, you know, this is actually no joke, because the robbing can take down a pretty strong colony very quickly. And we are, you know, starting to reduce these colonies. And just a month ago, they were doing strong. They had strong food stores. You go back and 4 or 5 weeks later, you notice that there's a lot of empty comb in your hive. You don't necessarily always have to have the chewed out pieces of wax debris to indicate robbing, although that's a really good, easy way to tell if your colony has suffered some robbing, is if you see chewed out pieces of wax. That's usually when combs have been uncapped and robbed out. But when you've got frames of nectar where there are no cappings, you're not going to have those little pieces of wax debris, and a colony can be completely robbed. I know we left several supers on colonies that weren't quite finished, weren't quite cured yet, and they have been completely robbed out or moved down. But either way, we had to remove some of those boxes and reduce those colonies. So this is the time of year where you kind of have to be careful to make sure that the amount of space that those colonies have is appropriate for the actual colony. And that can get a little challenging if there's a lot of robbers and a robbing frenzy going on. It's hard to estimate how many, you know, how large that colony truly is, and how much space does it need to be able to protect and defend its resources. Do you guys know what this is? This is something you'll see a lot of right now too, or you should have been seeing for the last couple of weeks. Her right here. What does she have? Propolis. Everybody loves this stuff.
Looks like pollen intersects.
It looks like pollen. It's really close to pollen, but let's see if I can, do I have a closer picture? There you go. Notice how like shiny it is. That's propolis. That's plant resin. So this is a Propolis Forager. And you'll notice it quite a lot, and you'll probably notice that it's going to pick up. It's been picking up the last few weeks, and they're getting ready to secure their hive for winter. So they're going to start, you'll start seeing when you open up the lids, the propolis just starting to peel off. Like you'll notice your hands getting more sticky. And those are the colonies getting ready for overwintering and getting ready to seal up those cracks. So when you're working those hives, try to do your best not to scrape all that stuff off. I know it's really kind of cumbersome, and we get into this habit of just scraping off the sides and cleaning things up. Don't do that in the fall, because that's just gonna set them back. They're getting ready to seal those cracks up. So just let them have those seals in place. Oh, and this picture was just showing I just thought it was really nice, showing like fresh pollen, kind of that matte texture versus bee bread, which is kind of glossier. It's got that glossy sheen. And this is a nice picture showing some bee bread being processed, different stages.
How long does it usually take when you put your wet supers on top of those inner covers for them to clean that out?
You can, I mean, less than a few hours. I mean, when we clean out wet supers, you know, you can put them out and then you pick them up the next day. You don't want to leave them out too long, but it's never taken that long to clean out.
Well, when I tried it last year, I think that I put the inner cover on wrong. I think wherever the notch, I don't know if the notch needed to be up or down, but my bees weren't doing a good job of cleaning it out.
I put mine on and went back 3 days later, and there was a lot of bees up there, and they were putting nectar in and had some of it capped again.
That's when it seems like it was too long.
Do you know what Judy, do you know if is it a notch issue? Should I have the notch facing down so it's just like a second entrance down into the hive at the top, so that it doesn't? Because yeah, it didn't work for me that well last year. to get them cleaned off.
How large were those colonies too? It is also a matter of the size. So I find that if the colony has like a big box of honey, but most of the colony is down on that second deep, they sometimes don't even realize that there's supers or boxes above that deep. But if it's a super strong colony and there's just a lot of bees on there, I will stack more supers on that one colony than to kind of spread it out even across the yard.
Okay. If you put that notch up, though, wouldn't that open that hive up for robbers?
Yeah.
I think
that would be my concern.
I'm trying to think back. I think I duct taped the notch closed now that I'm thinking back about it.
I probably, you know, it could be that there was maybe just not enough population for the cleaning.
Okay. Yeah, that's a possibility.
I put propolis in that notch to block them.
Okay. That's
Good use for propolis.
Bob knows the value of propolis. It's sticky and icky, but it's, you know, it's kind of like having that bucket of burr comb. It's useful. It's got uses. This is another picture, something you would commonly see. Do you guys recognize some of the issues with this frame?
Yeah, lots of deformed wing.
Yes, definitely. What else do you see?
No uncapped honey or nectar.
Mm-hmm. What does that mean?
They're kind of starving. They're dry, eating it out. Moving
Yeah, notice the orientation of this frame too. This is the correct orientation of the frame. What's wrong?
The honey's not at the top of the frame.
Why is the honey not at the top of the frame? Because they're getting robbed out. They're eating it out.
Yeah.
That's another sign, you know, I mean, the colony is weak, and obviously it's weakened by Varroa because you can see the amount of deformed wing in this colony. But you can also see a number of kind of robber bees. They're kind of darker. They're less furry. So one, you've got a weakened hive. Two, you've got robbers in the hive. And three, the honey's not in the right place. You've got no nectar cells, like Robert said, and it's not at the top of the frame where they deposit it.
And that means the robbers are picking up the mites from this hive too and taking them back.
Bingo. Yep. The other thing is, sometimes if you are in the middle of your mite treatments, for example, we are in the middle, like almost towards the end of the mite treatment. So the phoretic mite level is quite low. But what this is a sign that the mites in the cells were quite high at some point. And while our sugar rolls show low mites, this obviously showed that they were infested with mites at some point earlier on. And now the mites are gone, but the ramifications, the physiologically weak bees are probably not going to make it through the winter, you know, if they make it through the fall robbing season. This is another thing we see a lot of when in the summer, when the bees start to get really busy and beekeepers start to get busy and tired, we'll just kind of inspect the colonies, check to make sure they're queen right. And we may not make it all the way to the bottom box. This happens to be from a colony that is running all super frames or medium frames as their brood boxes. But the very bottom box is the one that beekeepers should be aware of right now at this time of the season, because that bottom box sometimes has a lot of issues that might be missed if you're only going to that top box. Some of the things that we see, you know, here again, we got lots of deformed wing. You've got spotty brood pattern. The remaining brood is starting to emerge. Let's see if I can find some more issues. Oh, here. How many of you guys have seen, you know, uncapped cells or perforated cells, cells that look like they've been opened, or brood that look like they've got some weird disease. Sometimes, you know, what we're seeing here as kind of a cruddy frame of brood or really poor brood pattern is the result of high mite loads. And, you know, when you have deformed wing like this, it's pretty obvious this colony is probably suffering from the PMS or parasitic mite syndrome, which is just the overloading of the mites causing a lot of different things happening. Brood loss. I would suspect that this activity here and here and here is, well, this is emergence, but here is hygienic behavior, bees that are trying to uncapping some of this and removing some of it out. And we've seen some of that in colonies where it looks like, you know, just a very strange disease, but it's really just bees missing their heads. So, do you guys, so at this time, when I go out and inspect hives and see something like this, you know, I'm already doing my mite treatments. I'm already trying to control the mites as well as I can. There's nothing I can do about it at this point. But what I can do further to help this hive is a reversal. And that is because you're think about the placement of the colony. This is the bottom box. Look at the frame. There's a little bit of brood coming out, but there's not a lot of food stores. There's not a lot of anything in this comb. And where is it? It's at the bottom of the hive. The top box probably has food, or the upper boxes probably have food stores. And then you have your feeder at the top. So what you want to do is make sure that all the frames are filled with food. So a reversal at the late fall helps you reverse that. So the empty combs are closest to your feeder. It makes it easier for those bees to fill and plug those empty comb and brood cells with food stores and try to cure it as quickly as possible. Do you guys do fall reversals? Anybody practice fall reversals?
I do when necessary, but I do reversals a lot in the spring once they've kind of moved their brood nest up over the course of the winter. I do it as needed.
I do it because I'm weak and I can't lift that top box and the robbing. So what I'll do is I'll go out into the hive. I'll have a bottom lid, you know, and I'll pull off that box. But what I'm actually doing is I'm not pulling the entire top box off with all the heavy food frames and everything on it. What I'll do is I'll bring an extra deep with me. I'll set that down. And then as I'm pulling honey frames out, I'll pull out half of the honey frames out of that box into my new box. Then I'll pull that top box off. Then when I'm inspecting my bottom box, I'll have an opportunity to pull some of the empty cells out and shift the honey frames back in. And then when I put them back together, I've basically done a partial reversal where I've moved the empty combs closer to the feeder and food back down, and I haven't had to lift 100 pounds. So it's an easier way for me to kind of do the inspection, switch the frames around, and quickly put it back together.
Yeah, that's what I do too. It's more of a reorganization than it is a full reversal. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think with our treatments, what we normally do is we'll use Apagard right now, thymol product, and we'll use it for, you know, the label rate starting, what did we start last month? September. We started in early September. We started a little earlier this year, trying to get more feed on the bees. And then we'll usually follow up with kind of a cleanup treatment with an oxalic acid dribble. What do you use?
In terms of our fall mite treatments,
Mm-hmm.
So last year we did Thymol with a follow-up oxalic acid dribble. I don't know if I was just too late or what happened. It just, last year was a bad mite year, so we still lost a lot of colonies. This year we got Apivar strips on that when we, some of them when we pulled honey, well, at the end of August, mostly the end of August, beginning of September. And Apivar is the product name for amitraz, which is the synthetic chemical that's used in those strips. That was an easier option for me because we have really low, we don't have a lot of people in our lab for help. So the strips was a lot easier. You just throw them in rather than with Thymol, you've got the gel that you put out on a card and place in there. So that was, and also I like to rotate the chemicals that I use just so I'm not using the same thing every year. Which can get, I think can get tough if you only have a handful of colonies and you have lots left over after the first year you buy it. But we recommend rotating treatments for sure. Someone asked, what is the minimum temperature for an oxalic acid dribble?
That'd be something I'd have to look up. I don't know off the top of my head, but I think a lot of times that's a really good question. Make sure you are checking that temperature, the optimal temperature range, because these products do have quite varied optimal functioning ranges. And so you don't want to use it when it's too cold because then it won't be active. And you don't want to use it when it's too hot because it might be too active. I know that
we had a speaker at the Iowa Honey Producers Association a few years ago. I'm trying to remember who it was. Liked 35 to 55 for his oxalic dribbles was his suggested range. So that the bees are clustered, but not your tight winter cluster.
Cluster temperatures.
Does that, would that include nighttime temperatures as well, I guess? Because you wouldn't want it to dip below 35 at night either.
Right. So he suggested doing it in the mornings while they were still clustered. Like he was talking the Thanksgiving time range. I mean, that time of year.
Even if it gets that cold at night, the brood cluster won't get that cold. You just want to be careful you're not getting them all wet while it's cold.
But 50 milliliters
it's not much.
No.
Yeah. I guess I don't know what the benefit would be if you wait too long. You know, like if you're waiting too long to put on the product, if you're waiting to November to put on products, what are you really safeguarding? Because you're opening up their envelope, you're putting on the product, but that probably should have been cleared up, in October, well before, when you're done with your fall feeding and you're kind of shutting them back down. You don't want to keep messing with them all fall season and through the early winter.
I think you're trying to get to a no brood situation. And you're trying to clean up the mites that may have been left over.
Or that came from the neighbors.
Yeah, that's part of the problem, right? That's why we need locally adapted stock, because some of these really robust Southern queens and California queens, they just keep brooding and brooding and brooding, and they don't shut down. So if they don't shut down, the mite production doesn't shut down. And that is, I think that's a question, a real issue that beekeepers in the Midwest have to be careful of, is if we're not watching our mite treatments, if we're not watching our swarm management during the summer, you're going to end up with really young queens, or you're going to end up with brood production periods that don't line well with our mite treatments and when we need to shut things down. Especially if you've had queens being replaced in August or late season, they're going to start ramping up their brood. You can have beautiful brood patterns in late fall, but that also means you're going to have a hard time controlling your mites. I know, Robert, what do you guys have dealing with in terms of your mite control down there?
Well, I have my own opinion. I'm an oxalic acid vapor person, and I like to start in September. For sure by the end of August, but now usually there's too many bees. And so this year was ideal because it was just different, but that's just me. I had the best success with it. It's the easiest. I've done it over 2,000 times this is my 7th season. I'm not, haven't really gotten started yet this year because I've got a neighbor I'm taking care of and other issues, but I am starting this week. So I'm a vapor person. I don't do the dribble. I think that's too much. That you can only, if you have to wait until November, if that's the only thing you're using, if you wait until November or December, it's too late. You need to treat your bees that are going into wintertime. You should be treating them now if you haven't already. You should have treated them, weeks ago, basically.
Yeah.
You want to treat the bees that are going to take care of, the bees that are going to be the winter bees. So.
How many times do you treat them with the vapor?
And I do it 3 times, and I have a whole spreadsheet and dates and everything. So I put it on there, and I do it 6 days apart. You can do it 5 days apart or 7 days apart. It's just worked the best for me over the last 7 years.
Are you using like the Pro Vape, the one that's quick, or are you?
No,
I've vaporized with I can't remember what it's called, where you have the battery hooked up for 90 seconds, then you let the hive sit for 5 minutes and take the iron out.
Oh, I do it. I mean, I have the quick ones, but my concern with the quick one is, are they getting enough oxalic acid in there? If you're only putting it in for 30 seconds. So I do the whole routine of sticking it in for 2.5 minutes. I use the timer on my iPhone, and then I move on to the next one. I use 5 bar rags. I dampen them, so I stick it in the entrance, and I move on. And I can do a whole yard of 14 colonies in 1 hour and 15 minutes. So
do you have upper entrances?
It's not that long. I'm sorry?
Do you have upper entrances?
I may have the little notch in the inner cover, but that's all it is. I don't like upper entrances.
Do you close that notch off then?
Sometimes they're already closed off. Like I mentioned earlier, I put a piece of propolis in there and block that off. Personally, I don't like that upper entrance. For robbing situations, I don't use it for ventilation.
I meant more for your vapor treatment.
And so it's so small, I don't worry about it for the vapor treatment.
Thank you.
But that's me. There are other people that I'm good friends with. I'm in Kansas City, and there are other people in our association that aren't so hot on it. So I kind of zip my lip and don't talk so much about it. But it works for me great. I mean, my losses, last year was an exceptional year because of the winter situation, but generally I've had 5% and less, about 5% losses, which I've had bees since the 70s. And to me, it's more like beekeeping was before the mites came along. So that's why I really like it.
Judy, didn't you tell us one time that you guys don't use vapor because of student liability?
Yeah, it's not. Yep, exactly. We do everything with the help of undergraduate students and student technicians, and there's already a concern with giving them fire and metal tools, sharp instruments. The last thing we want to do is now allow them with burning wands. So that we use the oxalic acid dribble and Apiguard, and we sometimes will use Apivar and switch things up. But yeah, that's basically our concern, is a handling thing for our group.
Yeah.
There was a question regarding wood bleach, and that's oxalic acid. Wood bleach is just a generic form. It's not recommended to use if there's a bunch of other ingredients in it, because you don't want to be introducing other chemicals to the compound. But that's what we're talking about, OA.
Right. And so yeah, if you get it from the bee supply dealer, it's basically the other ingredients that, are, from what I've discovered, was organic salts. Could be 0, 1, 2, or 3%. That's the other impurities that when they mention it and they talk about it. So,
but wood bleach is so cheap.
Yes, and it's ubiquitous. It's in a lot of foods you eat. Do you have blackberries?
I could treat 100 hives with $5 worth of, anyway.
No.
A question about that. The person said that their beekeeping mentor suggested that they do an oxalic acid dribble, but the sites that they found said wait till it's 40 degrees and there's no brood, and they have.
Yeah, you can't. I mean,
you won't be able to wait.
You can't wait that long. I mean, if you look at some of the bees on some of those deformed wing pictures that we've already seen today, if those are fresh pictures, those are too late anyway.
Those are the pictures of colonies being robbed out. And they're being robbed out because they've already been weakened by mites,
They're not going to make it through fall.
So
right.
Who asked that question, Nancy, my suggestion would be to go to a bee supplier or go to a website and order some Thymol or some Apivar or another mite treatment. Thymol and Apivar are good ones. If it's cool enough where you are and it meets the temperature requirements, formic acid would also be a choice too. Yeah. So I would recommend one of those three.
Because I've used everything except Apivar, and the reason is I'm trying to avoid getting chemicals in my wax.
Yeah, Apivar is the one synthetic chemical.
And that's one of the
most widely used synthetic chemical ones.
Yeah, but the big bee supply dealers are using that heavily, and that's probably why we had a lot of failure on it last year. But who knows?
So I'll put in another link to the Honeybee Health Coalition Varroa guide. There's a pretty good handbook that kind of has a table of comparisons of pros and cons and different products to use and when to use them, temperature ranges and things like that. I recommend any new beekeepers who haven't seen this to take a look and browse. I would like to bring up that this conversation is really pertinent because, this problem with what to use for Varroa is a standard problem across beekeeping. And what it's starting to lead to is a huge concern of misusing chemicals or maybe not even knowing which chemicals to put on when. And so some beekeepers are putting everything on just back to back, switching, product to product, which is not great for the bees. It's really hard on them and it's kind of causing residues. And then there's issues like just misinformation of cocktails that people are making up, and just let's try this because my colony survived. That's not the best recommendation you want to go for.
I went up the guy last week and he's using 4 products simultaneously and his hives are going to die anyway.
So this is really interesting because there's 2 things, right? Two things happening. One, consider how much money you're putting into Varroa management. And if you're not using it correctly or timely, it's just money down the drain. You'd be better served just spending that money on a new package or new queens and supporting your local queen operations so you can get more locally adapted, stock. The other thing is consider the reputation of the industry, right? We received an insider letter from an organization representing the farmers. They are about to launch a complaint to EPA regarding the heavy misuse of pesticides within beekeeping industry. I mean, calling the kettle black, but it's true. If you look at, let's consider farmers have this huge restrictions on pesticide safety, handling, certification, education requirements, and training. But they also have hundreds and hundreds of products to choose from in their arsenal to work with. Beekeepers have a few products that may or may not work for them. So it kind of promotes this habit of throwing everything in the hive or trying new things. So we just have to be very careful that we don't fall into this habit and start giving the industry as a whole a bad rep for using anything out of your kitchen and putting it into the hive, you know? So I just want to keep that in mind, is just, you know, less is good, especially if you time it right and you are watching the signs and the bees for when you need to treat, and you're listening to your local beekeepers and your mentors about their experience. I think that's the way to go. I don't know, Randall, Robert, Andy, any other suggestions?
Yes, that was well said. And I think that it can also swing to the other end of the spectrum too. I've talked to people whose mentors have told them to treat for mites, they should just sprinkle powdered sugar on their bees. And that's not an effective tool either. So it's important that we all are monitoring our mites, treating for mites, monitoring after our treatment to make sure that it was effective, because we're kind of all in this together. If I don't monitor my colonies and treat my colonies for mites and they die and they get robbed out by a neighbor's colonies, then I'm just part of the problem. So.
Yeah, that pretty well summed it up.
I don't know. What about suggestions for new beekeepers? Like, what would they, I mean, for especially like, I don't want to pick on Nancy, but for a new beekeeper who might be shopping around for treatments, what's the best way to go about it? What would your suggestions be?
I like the organic acids, whether it's formic or oxalic. And now both you can treat with honey supers on. So starting the first chance you get in late July, early August, don't hesitate to get those treatments on. And if you don't want your honey contaminated, pull your honey then.
And I've had a friend who tried HopGuard 3 this year, and it seems to have worked very well for her too. So you can rotate it among all those, and HopGuard you can also use with supers on.
I forgot about HopGuard. That's so they changed the formulation. I didn't use HopGuard 3. I think the commercial guys I work with, they used it that first year it came out, and they didn't have very good success, but the labeling was unclear about how much to use when. Has that been cleared up, or does anybody know much about it?
Yeah, the HopGuard 3 is different from HopGuard 2 and HopGuard 1. So
I think they're just still trying to figure out what the differences between the delivery method is. I think that's the problem, is efficacy. How effective they are is dependent on how evenly distributing is it being moved through the hive. I think they haven't quite got their formula right yet. Yeah, I don't think it's a question of resistance or failure. I think it's a question of delivery or you know, spread through the hive as far as HopGuard goes. Apivar is a different question. Amatraz is a synthetic product. You see a lot of the residuals in the wax. And so, you know, it's already 10, 15 years of that product. I do think that there are incidences where there are, you know, resistance showing up. But it makes sense. If it's in the comb and they're not replacing their comb, but using the same product year after year, it's more likely something that will develop.
To help beginners, I think it's the University of Wisconsin, they have a sheet that lists all the approved treatments, and they go through the pros and cons, what temperatures, etc. There's also another university on the East Coast that did the same thing. Those are nice back sheets summarizing.
Yeah, the one from the East Coast was, I think it's University of Massachusetts Extension, and with funding from the Northeastern Integrated Pest Management Center. They've got a really great. I'll see if I can find it and throw that. But it's a really good brochure handout. I'm trying to copy the same thing for our IPM for Bees working group. So
I think you're right, Randall.
I was going to say, does Cornell have quite a little bit too? Doesn't Cornell have?
Cornell's got a really good integrated pest management guide that also. Yeah. You know, I'll look for both of those and I'll put them in the chat.
Cornell and Oregon State, or maybe it's Oregon and Washington put together. Both of those, the West Side and Cornell, those are like compounds and chemical options for farmers. And, you know, they have a really nice list of like pollinator friendly options or less toxic options for farmers and applicators and things.
But that's funny. Farmers are complaining about beekeepers.
Well, and they're looking at how many certification trainings and requirements they have to go through. And, you know, some of them know a little bit about beekeeping and what we use in terms of our hives. And it's, you know, it's comparing apples and oranges, but there's a hinge of truth there, you know, in terms of some of the things that we see in beekeeping operations where people are just making things up in their kitchen and throwing it on. That I think needs to be controlled before it gets too out of hand. Sweet. I think there was a comment about whether or not there are courses for licensing beekeepers for using compounds. There's interest, but there isn't, at least as far as I know, maybe Randall, you know of something, but I don't know if there's any formal courses specific for beekeepers on how to use compounds. But those discussions are happening. Topics for next time, Randall? Suggestions?
I don't know, is it too early to talk overwintering? Wrapping hives, insulation?
Yeah, people can start getting ready.
Okay. Yeah, we can share what we do at our respective apiaries and compare notes.
Anybody store indoors potato sheds?
I want to.
You want to?
It's really funny. It's part of my job. Someone let me know that one of the first pieces of equipment donated to Iowa State University back when it was, you know, just getting started in 1870 was a Langstroth beehive. And so technically we're celebrating 151 years of beekeeping at Iowa State. So I dug into the archives just to so I could do a presentation to the entomology seminar on the history of beekeeping at the university. And they have so much great stuff, including extension handouts from 1913. And what's so fascinating is that in these pamphlets in 1913, they are talking about the exact same things that we are still talking about today. They're talking about bees that are genetically resistant. They're talking really huge concern then was American foul brood. Talking about, getting resistant stock, concerns about controlling American foul brood, wrapping your hives. One of the methods that they suggest, and so they've actually got photos just like I take now of these black wrapped hives, and they were doing it in 1913. And one of the methods that they had was to get a big wooden box, put the hive inside, and then throw leaves and debris, like yard debris around it as an insulation. It's weird. It's pretty fast. Maybe I can find those photos and share them with the next about overwintering.
Did the Langstroth hive, was it about 2 inches thick, the wood?
What do you mean?
You said you found a Langstroth hive in the
No,
archive.
I didn't find it. I found a ledger that said an American beehive was donated. And I assumed that since the Langstroth hive had only been invented 15, 20 years prior, that's what they meant.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry.
About a little bit about comb storage too next time. Maybe using moth crystals or BT or something.
Oh yeah, we should talk about that too. Judy, are you still there? Or did we lose you? Oh, there she is. Judy, you're muted.
Oh, I said my computer just ran out of batteries, so I had to sign on my phone. Now everybody can see I'm tuning in from my garage.
So we just had a suggestion next time to also talk about storing comb over the winter. You know,
you've got to show them your setup. You know, I'm so jealous of it. Your comb storage racks.
Oh, right. I'll have to show our racks, and you can. But we should also talk about how to control moths and different things you can do. So.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, overwintering.
We're gonna show pictures of our. I can show you my asbestos infested storage house, and you can show people all your new cool toys and racks.
All right, I got to get the blueprints to you of the racks. Yeah.
Yeah. Sweet. All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.
Happy
Thank you.
Oktoberfest.
Happy Oktoberfest.
Thanks very much.